Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm Chris, your NFL writer here at OccupyFantasy.com, here with some NFL DFS picks and tips for the Week 6 slates on FanDuel and DraftKings. In this video, we're going to be talking about some wide receivers. Not just our favorite wide receivers on the slate, but also the underperforming wide receivers. These are the best wide receivers to target in tournament formats in daily fantasy. We found this to be a successful strategy over the years, so we're trying to pass that information on to you. Stick around throughout the video. We'll be talking about them later on. Dropping these position previews every single week, so make sure you're subscribed to the channel. You'll get notified when we have a new video for you to check out. If you like what we did here, please give us a thumbs up on the video. Lets us know that you want to see more content like this. If you have any questions about wide receivers for Week 6, please leave them in the comment section below, or consider joining our Discord where Occupy staff and members are talking about the NFL action going on throughout the week, and also the other sports that are starting to heat up. You know, we have NBA season right around the corner. NHL season just started this week, so definitely feel free to check those out if those are your areas of interest as well. 10-game slate, so the options are starting to get a little thin, just not at the top of the board. A lot of the stars are on this slate, and we'd be wrong not to discuss them. So, let's get started with Tyreek Hill. The Chiefs have the highest implied team total on this slate as 7-point favorites in the highest total game. Tyreek Hill, definitely someone that should be on our radar then, right? Expect him to see about 11 targets in this matchup with the football team. Tyreek has 24% share of Mahomes' targets over the last 3 weeks, a 34% share of the air yards. So some of the opportunity there has started to go a little bit more to, Travis Kelce, the secondary options in this offense in the passing game. But Tyreek still very heavily involved. Obviously, he had his really strong game against the Eagles 2 weeks ago, so he's not an underperformer. In fact, he could be considered an extreme overperformer, but the thing with Tyreek is he's always going to perform extremely well with Patrick Mahomes throwing him the football. If you watched our running back video, then you already know that there's not really a lot of running backs worth paying up for on this slate, so it'll be easier to get Tyreek and some of these other guys into your lineups, which is why it's important and why we're talking about them this week in this video. The next wide receiver really is, the most expensive one, frankly. Davante Adams. Davante Adams, never a bad play. Davante Adams, the most involved player at the wide receiver position for sure. Blow-up spot last week against the Bengals, especially in a game that went to overtime. You needed Davante Adams. You may need him again here in Week 6. Adams, expect him to see about 12 targets in this matchup against the Bears. He has the numbers are crazy. 39% target share over the last 3 weeks, 56% share of Aaron Rodgers' intended air yards over the last 3 weeks of play. Really hard to argue with Davante Adams' role ever. Doesn't seem to be decreasing anytime soon. So feel free to use Davante Adams quite frequently. Probably one of the best plays on the board. Probably will be one of the most popular plays in all lineup types as a result. The other thing here is the Bears are also just 30th defending wide receiver ones, according to Football Outsiders DVOA advanced play-by-play data. So not that matchup is a problem for Adams the way he's fed, but also seems like he has a super easy matchup here, which is scary for anybody who wants to not play Adams here in Week 6. The role for Brandon Cooks has sort of declined a little bit. We're not seeing the insane 50% target share that we saw through the first couple of weeks, but it's still pretty healthy. 27% share of the targets from Davis Mills over the last 3 weeks, 45% share of the team air yards. Facing a Colts secondary that we just saw on Monday Night Football get exposed a little bit. 25th defending wide receiver ones. That's clearly what Brandon Cooks is for the Houston Texans. Expect Cooks to see about 11 to 12 targets in this matchup against the Colts in Week 6. And it makes him a fine tournament play, I think, as a result. People aren't really excited about the Texans offense, so Cooks always going a little overlooked, and his price keeps dropping because he's had a couple of mediocre games in a row here. 5.3 points last week, 9.7 the week before. Now is probably a good time to go back to the well with Brandon Cooks in some of your tournament lineups as a result. Other than Cooks, the mid-range and even the cheap options here this week are pretty tough. And that's the nature of a slate that has decreased in size. Only 10 games this week versus the 12 and 13 game slates we've gotten used to through the first 5 weeks of the season. Priced just above Cooks and of interest is Marquise Hollywood Brown, who's played very well for the Ravens since he had that poor game against the Lions 2 weeks ago where he dropped a couple of long passes, giving us 19.1, 36.5 fantasy points respectively. Certainly not expecting the 36-point game, although we will take it at this price. But Hollywood has a 18% share of the targets from Lamar over the last 3 weeks, 31% share of his air yards. We expect Hollywood to see, about 8 or 9 targets between that range against the Chargers here in week 6. Definitely the wide receiver 1 still. We'll see what happens with Rashad Bateman, obviously designated to return from IR. But it does seem like the success Lamar is having in the passing game, particularly focusing on Hollywood and Mark Andrews at tight end, will probably continue. The other thing to be aware of here is the Sammy Watkins injury, where he hurt his hamstring, was unable to finish the game on Monday Night Football in week 5. That may linger into week 6 and actually create even more opportunity for Hollywood in week 6. So definitely worth considering in one of the better game environments on the slate at a 52-point total against the Chargers at home for the Ravens. Before we get into the underperformers, there is one other cheap receiver that looks like he may be of value, and it's gross. I mean, nobody is excited about the Chicago Bears passing game. It hasn't performed very well to this point of the season. But Darnell Mooney is clearly a value on this slate at just 4,300 on DraftKings, 5,600 over on FanDuel. We have a matchup here where if you believe Mooney is still second fiddle to Allen Robinson in this offense, if you believe he's still the wide receiver 2, the Green Bay Packers are just 25th defending wide receiver 2s according to DVOA advanced play data. So Darnell Mooney is an opportunity here, given the fact that he has a pretty healthy 23% share of the targets from both Andy Dalton and Justin Fields over the last 3 weeks, and a 36% share of the air yards. Just $4,300, especially here on the DraftKings side of things. Expecting him to see about 8 targets this week. Feels like Mooney could be a really sneaky, good play, especially when you're looking for some more value at this position. But maybe the best place to go for value, the best place in general to go for picking tournament wide receivers, is the underperforming wide receiver list. And thankfully, we have a mix this week. We have some players that we feel comfortable with that have good roles, combined with some players that you got to hold your nose to kind of stick into your lineup. And so when you look at our list here that we have for you, the first 2 names on the list are pretty gross. But I just want to remind everyone that is the point of the underperforming wide receiver list. We're looking at guys who haven't lived up to expectation. And not just because, pre-draft, for those in season-long leagues, like we thought these players were going to be way better. It's because the data tells us the opportunity they're getting, the amount of targets, the amount of air yards that they're seeing. They're just not living up to the actual in-game expectation they have based on their usage. And so once again, we're pounding the table for Carolina Panthers wide receiver Robbie Anderson. Understand that doesn't really feel great, but Robbie Anderson still has a really good role here in this offense. 17% of the targets from Sam Darnold, 28% of the air yards in the last 3 weeks. And according to his air yard role, he should have scored at least a touchdown, if not more, in just this range the last 3 weeks. Makes him our clear number 1 underperforming wide receiver, underperforming his opportunity by over 20 fantasy points in our model. 4,800 on DraftKings, 5,500 on FanDuel. Robbie looking like a pretty sneaky play once again as a result. One of the only games in the late window this week, because it is a shorter slate, it's the Dallas Cowboys visiting the New England Patriots. The interesting thing about Nelson Aguilar, who is just $4,000 on DraftKings, just $5,400 on FanDuel, despite having a target share from Mac Jones that is roughly half of that of Jacoby Myers, who's the clear wide receiver 1, Aguilar has virtually the same amount of total air yards in this offense. That's because he has a 17-yard average depth of target versus roughly like 9.5 for Jacoby Myers. So even at half the volume, Nelson Aguilar could hit value for us just by reeling in one of these deep targets and hopefully taking it into the end zone for a touchdown. So we really like Nelson Aguilar on this slate as an underperforming wide receiver as well. Maybe the player that you'd be most excited to play as an underperformer, I'd say that we're most excited to play as well, is Terry McLaurin, Scary Terry with the Washington football team. The thing about Terry that is really awesome here is that his weighted opportunity role at wide receiver, score is about 0.82. That's a blend of his target share and his air yard share. 31% target share, 51% share of the air yards. Add those together. There's your weighted opportunity. Shout out again, Josh Hermsmeyer of the RIPairyards.com fame. Terry McLaurin, a great play here, especially when you consider that the Chiefs have been the worst defense in football. So the football team has their star wide receiver 1 going into a great matchup against a bad defense, and he's underperforming his expected opportunity in fantasy football. This is a great week to play Terry McLaurin in all formats, and we're excited especially to deploy him in tournament lineups as well. We see here Bryan Edwards is a true cheap option, just 3,600 on DraftKings, 5,400 on FanDuel, so not as cheap over there. But 11% share of Raider targets, 21% share of air yards in that offense. Giant asterisk here with the Raiders. I think everybody knows what's going on with the Raiders. Not going to address that here, but the big thing from a fantasy football perspective is new people involved on offense. Their former head coach, John Gruden, was calling the plays for this offense. So we'll see if the usage now changes in the passing game. Passing game was heavily focused on the tight end, Darren Waller, under John Gruden. Will it stay that way? Will Henry Ruggs, will Bryan Edwards be a little more involved? That's something we're about to learn. So we'll see. You see a couple of players from a different position on our underperforming list this week. It's the tight end position. Not an exciting position for us to talk about normally, but on a slate where it's a little smaller, on a slate where we're hurting for value, if we have some cheap players at tight end that are underperforming, decent opportunity in their offenses, it catches our eye and catches our attention. Cole Kmet with the Bears actually has a 16% target share and a 30% air yard share from Bears quarterbacks over the last 3 weeks, but just 7.9 total fantasy points to show for it. He's not seeing a lot of red zone targets, so the touchdown upside for a tight end isn't as strong with Kmet as it might be with some other guys at this position. But he's definitely due for some regression that would lead to a better fantasy output than we've seen over the last few weeks. You got to really like the opportunity here with Cole Kmet at just $2,800 on DraftKings especially. On the other side of the same game, Bob Tonyan with the Packers has 3 red zone targets on the season, no touchdowns in the red zone. 10 targets, 126 total raw air yards over the last 3 weeks, just 6.2 total fantasy points in that time frame. Another situation where it's very similar to Kmet, but with actually some red zone and touchdown upside with Tonyan. So, one interesting way to look at this when we have tight ends from the same game, the Bears playing the Packers here, might be an opportunity to consider a game stack, involving a tight end, involving the quarterbacks. We'll see what happens there. It's definitely a interesting game. Not sure if it's going to be included in our daily plug as a game stack. If you watch our quarterback video on the week 6 top plays playlist that we have for you, you probably have a good sense of which game stacks we're honing in on here early in the week. But we'll let you know by Friday afternoon when the daily plug posts on OccupyFantasy.com what we've actually decided to do. And speaking of the daily plug, that is going to do it for this rundown video, folks. Really appreciate you watching, as always. If you have any questions about the receivers on this slate or the underperforming wide receivers / tight ends that we gave you on this slate, please leave them in the comments section below. We'd be happy to talk to you there. You can also consider joining our Discord, where once again we have Occupy staff and other members talking about every single NFL slate, whether that's Classic or Showdown, and the other sports that are still going on as well. So if you're into that sort of thing, certainly don't want to miss out on that. When our plug hits on Friday, it will go through not just our favorite wide receiver plays, but also our favorite quarterbacks, running backs, tight ends. We'll give you some contests that we think are the best ones to play based off of your bankroll tier, the amounts of dollars you have to deploy on your favorite site. And most importantly, we'll give you the strategies you need to succeed in both low risk and high risk formats this week, depending on what you're choosing to play. Probably the most important section of the plug. Don't miss it. Make sure, please, that you're subscribed to the channel below. That's the only way you get notified when we have new content for you. A lot of things we're releasing pretty much every week now for the NFL. Not just the NFL, though. Obviously, UFC is something we've been doing videos on weekly as well. So if you're into that, make sure you're subscribed. If you like this video, please give us a thumbs up. It lets us know that you want to see more things like this, and so we'll keep doing them for you. Other than that, that is definitely going to do it here, folks. Once again, for Occupy, I'm Chris. Thank you for watching, and we'll talk to you soon.